So, how exactly does a nation break free from an empire? It's a huge question. Today, we're going to dig into the incredible story of Uzbekistan's independence. It's a journey that starts with the slow, dramatic crumble of the mighty Soviet Union and ends with the birth of a brand new state. Let's get right into it.
But hang on. Before we dive into the timeline, let's just step back and ask a bigger question. What even is history? I mean, is it really just a list of dates and events you're supposed to memorize for a test? Or is there something deeper going on? This question, well, it's pretty much the key to understanding the entire story we're about to explore.
You know, the medieval historian Ali Yazdi, he really nailed it. He saw history as the science of asking why. It's all about digging into the reasons a nation either thrives or, well, falls apart. And that is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to try to understand the reasons behind Uzbekistan's journey to independence.
Okay, so our story begins where so many do, with a crisis. We're setting the scene in the final, dramatic years of one of the 20th century's biggest superpowers. So this first act, it's all about the setting, a massive, crumbling empire. So for most of the 20th century, the Soviet Union was this huge socialist state. Now on paper, it was supposed to be a union of many different national republics, but in reality, everything, the government, the economy, it was all rigidly controlled from Moscow by one single party. And by the 1980s, that whole system was seriously creaking under the strain. Then, in 1985, a new leader comes to power, Mikhail Gorbachev, and he knew things had to change, and fast. So he kicked off two absolutely groundbreaking policies that would, maybe without him even realizing it, light the fuse for the entire Soviet Union's collapse.
The first one was called perestroika, which literally means restructuring. This was his big attempt to fix the stagnant Soviet political and economic system from the inside. And this is the crucial part, right? The goal was to fix the system, not to get rid of it. And the second policy was glasnost, or openness. Now this was a total game changer. After decades of intense government censorship, this policy suddenly opened up public access to information. It wasn't just about a free press. It was like a dam breaking. Decades of frustration, all these long-suppressed issues like deep economic inequality and this powerful desire for national identity, they all came flooding into the open for the very first time.
And one of those huge issues was this glaring economic unfairness. I mean, just look at this. Within the Soviet Union, Uzbekistan was at a massive disadvantage. Its GNP per capita and its agricultural productivity were both about half the Soviet average. These numbers made it painfully clear that the whole centralized system just wasn't working for everyone. For a lot of people in Uzbekistan, this didn't feel like a union at all. It felt like a total imbalance of power.
And this brings us right to Act 2. As the central power back in Moscow starts to weaken and this discontent is growing, Uzbekistan doesn't just sit around and wait for things to happen, it starts to actively forge its own path toward becoming a sovereign nation.
Now, this wasn't some kind of sudden, chaotic revolution. No, it was a very calculated, deliberate, three-step process, all done through legal channels. First, in 1989, they made Uzbek the official state language, a really powerful symbol of national identity. Then, in early 1990, they created their own presidential government, and then came the final, monumental step, the Declaration of Independence.
So what did this declaration, which they adopted on June 20th, 1990, actually do? Well, it was based on a really simple but totally revolutionary idea. From that day forward, any laws passed in Moscow would only be valid in Uzbekistan after they were approved by Uzbekistan's own government. I mean, just think about that for a second. This was a fundamental, seismic shift in power. But, declaring independence is one thing, actually building a stable, secure nation, that's another beast entirely. And in our final act, we get the big twist. The solution of sovereignty brought a whole host of new and pretty terrifying challenges. The hope, of course, was for a new nation in full control of its own future. But the reality, it was so much more complicated. The brand new republic was immediately hit with this staggering array of threats from both inside its newly drawn borders and from the outside. The country's first president, Islam Karimov, he laid these threats out pretty clearly. All of a sudden, Uzbekistan was a frontline state, sharing borders with active war zones in Afghanistan and Tajikistan. And internally, they were facing the rise of religious extremism, deep-rooted corruption, and simmering ethnic tensions, a lot of which were a direct result of old Soviet policies and these artificially drawn borders. The list of problems was just immense. And these weren't just, abstract threats on some politician's to-do list. Oh no.
Even before independence was officially declared, these tensions were already boiling over into real-world violence. You had mass riots and bloodshed in 1989 and 1990 that showed just how fragile the society really was.
And beyond all the political and social crises, the new nation inherited one of the absolute worst man-made disasters of the 20th century, a catastrophe that can be summed up by this one single staggering number: 70%.
70% of the Aral Sea, which was once this massive body of water, the fourth largest on the entire planet, was just gone. The coastline had shrunk by as much as 100 kilometers in some spots because of decades of disastrous Soviet irrigation projects. This wasn't just a problem, it was an ecological collapse on an almost unimaginable scale. And now it was Uzbekistan's problem to deal with, all alone.
So after all that, what's the big takeaway? President Karimov had this really powerful thought. He said the biggest conflicts today aren't fought with nuclear weapons, but on what he called ideological polygons, these battlegrounds of ideas, influence, and identity. It's a brilliant way to frame Uzbekistan's struggle as part of a much bigger, ongoing global story.
And that leaves us with one last question to chew on. In a world where ideologies are constantly clashing, where outside powers are always trying to exert their influence, and internal divisions threaten to tear you apart, how does a brand new nation even begin to find its footing and build a stable, lasting identity for itself? It was the central challenge for Uzbekistan back in 1991, and honestly, it's a question that's still shaping our world today.